Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world you probably never expected to visit, ancient Babylon. Imagine if the year is somewhere around 1750 BCE. You're standing on the edge of the great city, the sun is already sinking low, painting the sky in dusty orange and soft violet. The Euphrates River hums nearby, carrying the sounds of distant water sellers' merchants, shouting about goat cheese and the occasional stubborn donkey refusing to move another inch. You shuffle your feet along the packed dirt road, brushing past traders in brightly dyed robes, their baskets stacked high with dates and lentils. The towering walls of Babylon stretch above you, wide enough for chariots to race along the top if the guards get bored. In the distance, the mighty ziggurat, the great temple of Marduk, reaches toward the heavens like a giant terraced wedding cake. The smell of freshly baked flatbread and burning animal fat wafts through the air. You pull your thin linen scarf over your nose because, let's face it, sanitation isn't exactly a priority here. You're a newcomer to the city. Hired lucky you for an administrative job. You're pretty sure you didn't fully understand when you said yes. Something about writing lists and counting shipments. You heard there'd be free beer involved, so here you are. You probably won't survive the week without embarrassing yourself in front of a priest or accidentally miscounting a shipment of barley, but that's tomorrow's problem. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments so I can see just how far this sleepy little journey travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck your head as you step through the narrow city gate. The guards give you the usual lazy once-over and wave you through. You're clearly no threat, just another apprentice with ink-stained fingers and a look of mild confusion. Inside, Babylon hums like a living creature. The streets twist and turn, lined with houses made of sun-baked mud bricks. The walls are thick to keep out the desert heat, and the flat rooftops double as sleeping quarters on hot nights. You sidestep a group of women pounding grain with wooden pestles, their rhythmic thumping oddly soothing. Every now and then you spot scribes in long robes, clutching clay tablets like precious treasures they weave through the crowd. You can't help but marvel at the sheer size of the place. It's bigger than you imagined, sprawling loud, and somehow organized. People know where they're going. You, on the other hand, do not. You stop at a market stall where a man offers you a small round fruit. You take a bite and your mouth puckers instantly sour enough to make your eyes water. He laughs softly and mutters something about newcomers always falling for that trick. Wiping your hands on your robe, you continue toward the temple complex. It's your first assignment report to the temple scribes and learn the ropes. Apparently, the priests here don't just perform rituals, they run one of the largest administrative machines in the known world. Taxes, labor, supplies, land management. All of it flows through their hands like water through a canal. And speaking of canals, you pass one now, a shallow trench, lined with clay bricks, water trickling along lazily. Two boys splash each other with muddy hands while an older man shouts at them to stop wasting good irrigation water. You smile, realizing that every inch of this city has been carefully managed, planned, and most importantly recorded. Your feet finally bring you to the shadow of the temple's outer wall. It's massive, its bricks carved with symbols and worn smooth by centuries of sand-laden wind. You glance up and spot what looks like a row of tiny windows near the top, where you imagine some poor scribe is already hard at work by lamplight. You pause to take it all in the scale, the history, the undeniable sense that every moment here is being noted somewhere by someone on a tiny clay tablet. You wonder if your name is already written down somewhere, misspelled of course, and followed by the words "new assistant prone to getting lost." The temple doors creak open just as you step forward. A robed figure stands there, eyebrows raised clearly, waiting for you to make the first move. You take a deep breath, wipe your sweaty palms on your tunic, and step inside. Welcome to Babylon, where even your smallest mistake might end up preserved in clay for the next 4,000 years. The moment you step through the heavy temple doorway, the air shifts. It smells cooler somehow. Earthy. Like wet clay and burning oil lamps. You're greeted not with words, but with a long, tired sigh from the robed figure in front of you. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. His expression says it all. You're not the first wide-eyed apprentice to wander in, and you definitely won't be the last. He turns without a word and starts walking, his sandals slapping softly against the stone floor. You scurry after him, nearly tripping over a loose bit of your robe. You're led through dim corridors lit by flickering oil lamps resting in wall niches. The walls here are covered with more of those wedge-shaped carvings you've started to recognize as cuneiform. It's everywhere. Every inch of space seems to hum with information you can't yet read. You wonder briefly if there's a clay tablet somewhere warning staff to beware of slippery floors. Finally, you emerge into a long hall lined with low benches and stone shelves. But what catches your eye are the hundreds, no thousands of clay tablets stacked neatly in rows. Some are as small as your hand, others the size of roof tiles. All of them bear the same tiny wedge-shaped marks. This, your guide finally mumbles without turning, is the temple's record room. You stare, trying to grasp the sheer volume of information sitting in front of you. This isn't some random archive. This is the pulse of the city tax records temple, donations, property agreements, labor lists, food inventories. It's all here. Organized, cataloged, monitored. The phrase "the empire needs organizing" suddenly feels very real. And here's the kicker. Babylon isn't just a city. It's the beating heart of an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. That's a lot of people, a lot of land, a lot of taxes, and, as you'll soon learn, a lot of complaints. The kings of Babylon, mighty rulers like Hammurabi, knew that soldiers alone couldn't hold an empire together. You can't spear your way to stability. You need systems, you need rules, you need records. So they built a government not just of warriors, but of administrators, scribes, like the ones now bustling quietly around you. Carefully shaping clay with their styluses like surgeons performing delicate operations. Your guide finally stops in front of a low table and gestures for you to sit. You do, awkwardly folding your legs beneath you. He pulls a small tablet from a nearby shelf and places it in front of you. Its old edges, chipped, surface worn, but the marks are still sharp enough to read, if you knew how that is. He taps the tablet with the end of his stylus and mutters, This is barley. This is fish. This is worker duty. You nod like you understand, even though you don't. Not yet. But you're starting to get the picture. Every shipment of grain, every delivery of oil, every laborer's daily task, it's all written down. It has to be. Without these records, the temple's sprawling operations would grind to a halt. You glance around the room again, realizing you're surrounded by the life's work of generations of scribes. Historians today still debate just how centralized Babylon's record-keeping truly was. Some argue these archives were limited to temple affairs, grain in, grain out, that sort of thing. Others believe they were part of a much larger imperial system feeding data all the way up to the king's court. Either way, one thing is clear: Babylon didn't run on brute force alone. It ran on administration, on details, on tiny, painstakingly carved marks pressed into wet clay. And that, as you're starting to realize, is exactly why you're here. To learn the art of recording everything. To become part of the silent machine that keeps this empire humming along one tablet at a time. Your guide stands and nods toward the far end of the hall. You start tomorrow, he says simply. Bring your own stylus, if you want to survive. He turns and leaves you sitting there, surrounded by more information than you can possibly process. You let out a long breath you didn't realize you were holding. Welcome to the real power of Babylon. Not the soldiers, not the priests, not the walls. The scribes. You don't sleep much that night. Not because the city is loud, although it is, but because your brain won't stop picturing all those clay tablets stacked like little bricks of anxiety. You turn over on your thin woven mat, staring up at the cracked ceiling of your rented room, wondering how anyone ever learns to read those marks. The morning arrives faster than you'd like. You shuffle into your sandals, tie your robe, and grab the cheap stylus you bought from a street vendor on your way home last night. It's a little crooked, but it'll do. You tell yourself that no one's going to inspect your stylus. You'll later find out they absolutely do. Welcome to ancient office culture. By the time you arrive back at the temple, the record hall is already alive with the gentle scratching of styluses pressing into clay. Scribes sit cross-legged at low tables, their hands moving with mechanical precision. You slide into your assigned spot, the very end of the row, of course, and glance down at the blank slab of wet clay waiting in front of you. Your instructor appears again holding what looks like the ancient version of a training manual, just a larger clay tablet covered in cuneiform. He places it on your table with a thud and leans in close. Cuneiform, he says, tapping the tablet. It means wedge-shaped. Because that's all it is, tiny wedges. He gestures to your stylus. Hold it like this. You mimic his grip. It feels unnatural, like trying to write with a tiny wooden chisel. He guides your hand to make your first mark, a simple vertical wedge, then a horizontal one. You're feeling oddly proud of yourself until he squints at your work and mutters, "You just wrote cow bladder." Perfect. You're off to a great start. The day unfolds in slow, deliberate lessons. You practice pressing the stylus into clay at different angles, each shape representing sounds, words, or numbers. You quickly learn that the spacing matters. The depth matters. The angle matters. Basically, everything you're doing matters. And if you thought your handwriting was bad in modern times, congratulations. You've just unlocked a new level of illegibility. Around midday, the instructor gives you a real tablet to copy a record of fish deliveries to the temple kitchens. You squint at the tightly packed marks, trying to translate them one by one. You manage to copy the first line before realizing you've skipped an entire symbol. You glance around to see if anyone noticed. Of course they did. The scribe sitting next to you leans over, smirks, and whispers, "Hope you like rewrites." By late afternoon, your hands are cramping, your neck is sore, and your stylus feels like it's mocking you. You glance at the pile of finished tablets beside the other scribes. Your own pile consists of one crooked tablet with your name misspelled twice. Still, you're beginning to see the beauty in it, the sheer commitment it takes to turn wet clay into a permanent record. Some of these tablets have survived for thousands of years. Somewhere out there, buried under layers of earth, your sloppy beginner's work might still exist long after you're gone. Historians today still argue over whether Babylonian scribes were highly specialized professionals or just average temple workers trained on the side. Some say the scribes held elite status, trusted with the city's most important records. Others believe they were little more than administrative assistants, overworked and underpaid. You have a feeling the truth lies somewhere in between. As the sun begins to dip low again, your instructor calls it a day. You stand stretching your aching legs and glance back at your tiny, misshapen tablet. You pick it up carefully, turning it over in your hands. It's heavy, surprisingly so, for something so small. You imagine someone thousands of years from now digging it up and laughing softly at the awkward spacing and crooked marks. You smile to yourself. Day 1 survived. The next few days blur into a routine that somehow feels older than time itself. You arrive at the temple just as the sun peeks over the city walls. You shuffle to your station, nod politely to the same half-interested scribes, and sit cross-legged on the same thin mat. Your hands already ache in anticipation, like they somehow know what's coming. Today, your instructor doesn't hand you a practice tablet. No. Today, he set something far more intimidating in front of you, an actual shipment record. Freshly delivered. Still damp from the scribe who drafted it before sunrise. It's a list of goods being transported to the temple kitchens. Barley, fish, garlic dates, and oddly several jars labeled with a symbol you've never seen before. You squint, tilting your head slightly. It looks vaguely like a spiky reed. Your instructor leans in, noticing your confusion. That's sesame oil, he mutters, for cooking in lamps. You nod like you already knew that, which you absolutely did not. He taps the bottom of the tablet. Your job, copy this. Exactly. No mistakes. You swallow hard and reach for your own slab of clay. You carefully press the stylus into the surface, trying not to breathe too loudly. One misplaced mark, and you'll be scraping it off with the blunt end, starting all over again. The hours stretch slow and heavy like warm honey. Occasionally, your instructor circles the room, glancing over shoulders. He stops behind you more than once, sighs deeply, and moves on without a word. You can almost hear him adding your name to some invisible mental list labeled, "Most likely to misspell fish again." You glance sideways at the other scribes. Their hands move like dancers in a slow, deliberate ritual. You notice how they roll their eyes when the clay sticks to their sleeves, or when a fellow scribe's tablet cracks down the middle. It's oddly comforting to know that even the experienced ones aren't perfect. As the afternoon heat builds, someone cracks open a small window near the ceiling. A breeze carries in the scent of wet riverbank mud and roasting onions from a nearby food stall. Your stomach growls softly. You try to ignore it, focusing instead on getting the barley symbol just right. Halfway through the list, your stylus slips. Your heart lurches as you stare at the accidental extra wedge. You glance around, panic rising. Should you scrape it? Start over. Pretend it's a fancy new variant spelling. Historians today still debate how strictly scribes were expected to follow the official spellings of their time. Some argue that the variations were tolerated, even expected, given how language shifted across regions. Others claim the temple had strict formatting rules enforced by grumpy overseers with far too much free time. You decide not to risk it. Carefully, you scrape away the mistake and smooth the clay with the heel of your hand. It leaves a faint mark, but nothing too obvious, hopefully. By the time the sun begins to set, you've finished copying the entire list. You hold your tablet up to the fading light, comparing it to the original. It's not perfect, nothing ever is, but it's close enough to earn a tiny, almost imperceptible nod from your instructor. He takes both tablets and places them on a high shelf where they'll dry and harden overnight. You're not entirely sure if they'll be used filed or quietly smashed if someone spots your beginner's mistakes. Either way, you feel something strange blooming in your chest. Pride. You survived another day. You didn't destroy anything. You learned that sesame oil is somehow more important than you realized. And you didn't write cow bladder. Progress. As you gather your things to leave, you hear one of the older scribes mutter under his breath, "Enjoy it while you can." Tomorrow you learn the big lists. You pause in the doorway, half dreading, half curious. Big lists. You'll find out soon enough. The big lists, as it turns out, are not some ominous mythical scribe legend meant to scare apprentices. Oh no, they are very real, very long, and very boring. So boring, in fact, that halfway through your first attempt, you catch yourself nodding off your stylus, slipping from your hand and landing in your lap with a soft thud. The head scribe's dry cough from across the room snaps you back to attention. You sit straighter, pressing your palms against your knees to ground yourself as he approaches, dragging something behind him. You squint. It's a massive tablet wider than your forearm, carved on both sides. The surface looks crowded, filled with row after row of tiny, unforgiving cuneiform wedges. This, he says flatly, is the temple's copy of the Code of Hammurabi. You stare, half expecting it to glow or hum with divine energy. It doesn't. It looks like every other tablet, just bigger. But as you lean in, you recognize some of the markings from stories you've heard in the streets, laws about property trade marriage, and even how to handle disputes over livestock. Babylon's king Hammurabi had these laws carved into stone stelae and placed around the empire to proclaim his justice. But here in the temple archives, it's the practical version, the one scribes actually reference to settle real disputes. The head scribe taps a passage halfway down the tablet. This is the section on wages, he murmurs. What workers get paid? What employers must provide? You lean closer, tracing the marks with your eyes. According to the code, a farm laborer is entitled to a set amount of grain per day. A builder. Slightly more. A herdsman. It depends on the season. And then there's the brewer. You blink. Brewers apparently are legally entitled to payment in both grain and beer. You glance up at the scribe, half expecting him to crack a smile. He doesn't. It's the law, he says, stone-faced, and people will argue over every drop. You suddenly understand why the scribes here look so permanently exhausted. The Code of Hammurabi is famous today for its eye for an eye punishments, but as you run your finger over the tablet's rough surface, you realize it's also filled with clauses about daily life rent wages, trade disputes, family arrangements. Historians still debate whether these laws were enforced strictly or served more as a royal PR stunt, designed to show the king as a just and wise ruler. You suspect the answer lies somewhere in the middle. The temple scribes seem to treat these laws like guidelines, references to pull out when someone tries to cheat their workers or underpay the temple for goods. The head scribe pulls out another tablet, a fresh delivery of complaints from laborers working on a new irrigation canal. You glance at the first few lines. It's the same story you've heard whispered all week, workers claiming they haven't received their full barley rations. Supervisors insisting they have. The scribe raises an eyebrow at you. You want to try? He asks. You hesitate but nod. He hands you a blank tablet and waits. You glance between the two documents, your heart thudding a little faster. Your task is simple: copy the section of the code that applies to these workers' wages, then add it to the response tablet. It feels weirdly official, like you're passing judgment on a case you barely understand. You press your stylus into the clay, carving the familiar symbols for barley worker and ration. The tablet wobbles slightly in your nervous hands, but you manage to finish without dropping it. When you hand it back, the scribe nods approvingly. This, he says softly, holding up the response tablet, is how justice moves. One wedge at a time. You glance back at the massive code tablet resting on the shelf. For the first time, you realize these aren't just old words carved into stone. They're alive, echoing in the quiet shuffle of scribes, in the murmur of disputes settled over clay, in the daily rhythm of a city trying to hold itself together. You gather your things, stepping carefully around a scribe who's already nodding off, face first into his tablet. Big lists indeed. The next morning you arrive early, too early apparently. The temple courtyard is empty except for a few sleepy guards leaning against their spears. You wander toward the record hall, stepping softly on the stone floor, your sandals making barely a whisper. Inside, the scribes are already gathering around a large table, crowding in to examine a new shipment of fish. Again, you've never seen so many fish in your life. Barley may be the city's bread and butter, but fish seems to be the staff's personal nemesis. You edge closer and realize they aren't just counting the fish they're arguing. It clearly says 221 scribe hisses, tapping a clay tablet with the stylus so hard you fear it might snap. No, it says 230, another snaps back, jabbing at the same line with equally dramatic flair. You lean in, squinting at the marks. Honestly, it could be either. The symbol for 20 and 30 are nearly identical, especially when rushed. It's like trying to tell the difference between the numbers 6 and 8 written by someone who clearly hadn't finished their morning barley beer. The head scribe pinches the bridge of his nose and sighs deeply as if this kind of drama happens more often than he'd like to admit. He waves you over. Apprentice, he grumbles. Tell me, 20 or 30? You freeze. Every muscle in your body screams, I am not paid enough for this. But you step closer anyway, staring down at the disputed marks. You trace the wedges slowly with your finger, tilting your head for better light. It's no use. Whoever carved this tablet either had the world's worst stylus or simply didn't care. You take a breath. It's 20, you whisper, hoping you sound more confident than you feel. The scribe who argued for 30 lets out a loud theatrical groan, while the other nods in smug satisfaction. The head scribe scratches something on a separate tablet and waves everyone back to their stations. Crisis sort of averted. Historians still debate how much creative interpretation went into Babylonian record-keeping. Some argue the scribes were meticulous, double-checking every mark. Others believe they often fudged numbers, especially when supplies mysteriously disappeared between shipment and delivery. Judging by the looks exchanged around the room, you're starting to suspect that the truth involves a whole lot of fudging and very little double-checking. Later that afternoon, another scribe hands you a small tablet listing temple supplies, jars of sesame oil, bundles of wool, and, of course, more barley. You glance at the notes scribbled on the side. One of the jars is marked as missing. Your curiosity gets the better of you. What happens when something goes missing, you whisper? The scribe leans in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Depends on who lost it, and who's asking. You blink. That's not ominous at all. Apparently, when supplies vanish, the blame game begins. Was it the worker who packed the shipment? The supervisor who received it? The priest who recorded the inventory? No one wants to be the one holding the empty basket when the temple inspectors come knocking. You spend the rest of the day copying shipment lists, trying not to imagine all the whispered accusations floating through the halls. Every missing jar of oil, every undercounted bundle of wool, it all ends up here, carved into clay, waiting for someone to notice, or quietly ignore. As the sun sets, the scribes begin packing up for the night. You glance around the room one last time, realizing you've only scratched the surface of Babylon's bureaucratic machine. Tomorrow you suspect the stakes and the drama will climb even higher. You arrive the next morning to the sound of someone loudly clearing their throat. It's the head scribe again, standing at the entrance to the record hall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You hesitate mid-step, but he waves you in. Change of task, he says simply. Today you'll be working on job lists. Job list, you nod, pretending you know what that means, but you don't, not yet. You follow him to the far corner of the archive where a different group of scribes sit around a low stone table, sorting through tablets stacked like miniature loaves of bread. One scribe looks up and gives you a half smile that feels both welcoming and vaguely apologetic, as if to say you have no idea what kind of boredom you just signed up for. The head scribe gestures toward the pile. These are contracts, job descriptions, worker agreements. You'll help copy them. You settle onto a mat, pulling the first tablet toward you. You scan the symbols, slowly piecing together the meaning. It's a work agreement for a brewer. You suppress a smile. Of course it's a brewer. The text is surprisingly detailed. It lists exactly how much grain the brewer receives, how much beer they're expected to produce, and even what happens if the beer isn't pleasing to the temple steward's taste. You wonder if the brewer gets to argue back if someone claims it's too bitter. Probably not. The next tablet describes the duties of a brickmaker. You trace the marks, noting how specific it is about the material's fine clay from the riverbank mixed with straw shaped in molds and dried for 7 days beneath the sun. It even outlines the penalties for delivering cracked bricks. You can practically hear the brickmakers groaning somewhere out there in the city. You work your way through the pile, boatmen, basket weavers, herdsmen, builders. Every job you can imagine is spelled out in meticulous detail, right down to how much they're paid in barley oil or wool. Some agreements even include housing arrangements, small rooms within temple compounds or shared spaces along the canals. And here's the funny thing, it all feels eerily familiar. You start to recognize patterns. The way every job comes with impossible expectations. The way every task seems to require extra duties as needed, which you suspect is Babylonian, for you'll end up doing twice as much for the same pay. You pause over one particularly long tablet. It's a contract for a supervisor of canal laborers. It lists not only the workers' tasks inspecting tools, counting workers reporting absences, but also the penalties for failure. If the canal isn't dug correctly, the supervisor pays a fine. If workers abandon the project, the supervisor answers for it. You glance at the scribe sitting beside you. Seems risky, you whisper. He chuckles softly. That's the point. Historians today still argue about whether these job descriptions were enforced strictly or served more as formalities. Some scholars believe workers negotiated their terms more casually than the tablets suggest. Others argue these contracts were binding, leaving little room for bargaining. Judging by the groans and eye rolls from the scribes around you, you suspect these lists were taken very seriously, at least when it came time to assign blame. As the sun starts to dip lower, the head scribe returns and glances over your copies. He doesn't say much, but you notice he doesn't correct anything either. You take that as a win. You gather your things, stepping around another stack of tablets labeled pending verification. You make a mental note to never let your name end up in that pile. As you head out into the evening streets, you can't help but chuckle to yourself. Somewhere in this city, brewers are sweating over their next batch. Brickmakers are praying their clay dries evenly, and canal supervisors are calculating how much barley they'll lose if their crew walks off the job. And tomorrow you'll be writing it all down. The next day starts with raised voices. You're still halfway through adjusting your robe when you hear them echoing from inside the temple courtyard. Loud, frustrated, and from the sound of it, very, very sweaty. You quicken your pace, slipping through the entryway just in time to see a small group of workers, mud-caked from head to toe, arguing with a pair of scribes near the record hall door. Their hands are waving, wildly pointing to a freshly pressed tablet that one of the scribes clutches like it might explode at any moment. You edge closer, catching bits of the argument. No more barley. No more work. One man shouts, jabbing a dirt-streaked finger toward the tablet. Another chimes in. We finished the canal section days ago. Days, where's our beer? Ah, so this is it, the legendary canal diggers' rebellion you'd heard whispered about earlier in the week. You try to look busy, pretending to inspect a nearby shelf of tablets, but your ears are locked on every word. The workers are furious. They claim they finished their section of the irrigation canal early, yet their promised rations of barley and beer never arrived. The scribes in return wave their own tablets like shields, insisting that the records show all payments were made. The reality you suspect lies somewhere in the gap between those tablets, the gray area where numbers get, let's say, creatively adjusted. One of the workers suddenly spots you. His eyes narrow, and for one terrifying moment, you're certain he's about to demand you settle the argument. But instead, he turns back to the scribes, crossing his arms defiantly. "We're not lifting another reed basket until someone checks the storeroom," he declares. Historians today still argue over the scale of labor unrest in ancient Mesopotamia. Some records suggest that strikes like the one unfolding before you were rare but not unheard of. Others believe they were far more common than the official tablets admit, quietly resolved without royal intervention. The head scribe finally steps forward, rubbing his temples like a man who's seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. "Fine," he sighs, "we'll check." The workers don't budge. They stand their ground, muddy arms crossed, jaws clenched. You watch as the scribes gather the disputed tablets and head toward the temple storerooms. Curious, you trail behind at a safe distance. The storeroom is cooler, the air thick with the scent of grain and old oil. Tall jars line the walls, some sealed with clay stoppers, others left half open. One of the scribes pulls out a wax-coated tally tablet, squinting at the marks as if hoping they'll magically rearrange themselves into a less incriminating number. After several minutes of muttering, cross-checking, and increasingly panicked glances, the head scribe lets out another heavy sigh. He turns to the assistant scribes and grumbles something you barely catch. They did underpay them. Barely, but still. The scribes reluctantly gather the missing rations, several baskets of barley, and a few sealed jugs of beer. You watch them carry the goods back toward the waiting workers, who, upon seeing the payment exchange, victorious smirks. One of them even lets out a long, exaggerated yawn like they weren't really worried to begin with. You can't help but grin. These men knew their worth, and more importantly, they knew how to push back. As the crowd disperses, the head scribe catches you watching. He raises an eyebrow and motions for you to follow him back to the record hall. "Let that be a lesson," he mutters over his shoulder. "Records mean nothing if no one trusts them." You nod silently, tucking that little gem of wisdom into your ever-growing mental collection of things no one mentioned when they hired you. Later that evening, as you gather your things to leave, you pass the same group of workers now lounging near a canal, laughing and drinking their hard-earned beer. One of them spots you and raises his jug in a mock toast. "Write that down," he calls with a grin. You smile to yourself. Oh, you will. The next morning, the temple feels tense. Gone are the casual glances and lazy stretches you'd grown used to seeing among the scribes. Today, the head scribe stands in the middle of the record hall with his arms crossed, looking like someone who's already dealt with one disaster too many before breakfast. Supervisors reports he barks, waving his hand toward a fresh pile of clay tablets stacked precariously on a low shelf. They're all late. You glance toward the tablets. At first glance, they look just like any others, but when you pick one up, you notice something different. These aren't shipment lists or temple receipts. These are worker attendance records. Your stylus hovers over the damp clay as you read the first few lines. Absent on the 5th moon. Returned on the 6th. Absent again on the 8th. You almost laugh. It reads like the world's oldest roll call sheet. You pull another tablet towards you. This one is even more dramatic. It accuses a canal crew of deliberately extending their lunch hour to avoid afternoon heat. You stifle a chuckle. Looks like long lunch breaks are older than you thought. As you continue reading, you start to notice a pattern. Many of these reports mention the same workers over and over again. You can practically see the supervisors' frustrated faces as they try to explain why the same crew keeps getting lost on their way back from the barley storerooms. And it's not just the laborers under scrutiny. Several tablets complain about fellow supervisors skipping duties, misreporting numbers, or your personal favorite taking extended visits to the brewer's quarters for private quality inspections. You make a mental note to borrow that phrase someday. Historians still debate whether these kinds of reports reflect actual widespread laziness, or if they were part of temple politics supervisors blaming others to cover their own mistakes. Some scholars argue these tablets were tools of accountability. Others suspect they were nothing more than ancient tattletales, designed to shift blame when things went wrong. Judging by the sheer volume of complaints you're holding, you lean toward the latter. The head scribe leans over your shoulder, glancing at the pile. "We'll need to summarize these," he mutters. "Turn them into something the temple priests can actually read without falling asleep." You blink. "Summarize you." He nods toward a fresh slab of clay. You start. You hesitate, staring at the mound of petty complaints in front of you. How exactly does one summarize the ancient equivalent of workplace gossip? You take a deep breath and begin pressing your stylus into the clay. Canal crew absent on 5th and 8th. Supervisor claims equipment failure. Laborers report delayed rations. You pause, squinting at your own writing. You wonder if anyone will actually care about these details. Then again, someone had to write them down in the first place. You glance toward the temple's inner sanctum where the priests conduct their rituals. Somewhere beyond those walls, decisions are being made based on these tiny, easily missed details. Rations adjusted. Workers reassigned. Supervisors quietly removed from their posts. You finish your summary and pass the tablet to the head scribe. He gives it a quick glance, nods, and adds it to the growing stack. By the time the sun starts to dip again, you've gone through dozens of similar tablets. Each one paints the same picture: a city held together, not by perfect systems, but by people arguing, blaming, and somehow keeping the machine moving anyway. As you gather your things to leave, you catch sight of the canal crew again this time, carrying baskets of clay toward the riverbank. One of them spots you, smirks, and mimics a dramatic yawn. You grin and give him a small, knowing wave. He probably just made it onto another supervisor's complaint tablet. By now you've noticed something peculiar about Babylonian paydays. No one ever seems entirely sure whether they've been paid correctly. You'd think that after all the recording checking, rechecking, and arguing, someone would have it figured out. But no. It's barley season again, and payday has turned into the city's favorite guessing game. Today you've been assigned to assist with what the scribes call distribution review. You quickly learn this is fancy temple speak for double-checking the math before anyone starts shouting. You sit down in front of several payout tablets, each one listing how much grain oil or wool various workers are supposed to receive. First up, a team of basket weavers. You run your finger along the rows of symbols. 4 workers, 10 shekels of barley, 2 measures of wool, 1 jar of sesame oil. Sounds simple enough until you compare it to the second tablet. 4 workers, 8 shekels of barley, 2 measures of wool, no sesame oil. You glance up, waiting for someone to tell you it's a copying error. No one does. The scribe sitting next to you leans over and whispers, "Check the date." You squint at the faint marks near the corner. The first tablet is dated 1 week ago, the second just 3 days ago. He leans back with a smirk. "Welcome to wage adjustments." Apparently, temple managers have the authority to change payout amounts based on, well, whatever reasons they can justify: crop shortages, political shifts, or the infamous performance reviews you've heard muttered darkly around the archive. Historians still argue whether these changes reflected actual economic conditions, or if they were simply ways for the temple to stretch resources. Some scholars suggest wage reductions were often communicated poorly, if at all, leading to understandable worker outrage. And judging by the frustrated grumbles you hear growing louder outside the temple walls today, is shaping up to be no different. By midday, the first wave of workers arrives to collect their barley rations. You watch from your station as scribes carefully scoop barley from giant woven baskets, weighing it with stone weights and balancing scales. One man steps forward, holding his payment tablet with both hands, looking hopeful. The scribe checks the list, scoops the barley, and hands over the measured amount. The man frowns. "This isn't right," he says quietly. The scribe sighs, already bracing for the conversation. You watch as they compare tablets, pointing, muttering, frowning. You already know how this will end. The payout stands, of course. The record says 8 shekels, not 10. Case closed. Or so you think. The worker doesn't leave. Instead, he steps aside, pulls out a second tablet, and slaps it down on the table. It's older, worn, but still legible. It clearly promises 10 shekels. The scribe pinches the bridge of his nose. This is going to take a while. You quietly edge closer, curious. The head scribe is called in. More tablets are brought out. You lose count of how many times someone mutters, "Check the date again." By late afternoon, the pile of conflicting records is taller than your elbow. Finally, the head scribe throws up his hands and declares, "Split the difference." 9 shekels. The worker doesn't argue. He takes his barley nods and walks away, leaving the scribes to quietly fume among themselves. You glance down at your own tablet, half finished, half wondering if anyone will actually read it before next barley season. Later that evening, you overhear 2 scribes debating whether anyone keeps a master list of all these adjustments. One claims the king's court must have one. The other snorts and says, "If they do, it's probably wrong anyway." You smile to yourself as you pack up your things. You're starting to suspect that Babylon's economy runs less on precise math and more on the art of negotiation and the willingness to accept that no one really knows who owes what to whom. The next few days roll by like the sluggish waters of the Euphrates. You're back on routine duties, copying records, smoothing clay, trying to make your cuneiform slightly less embarrassing. But today brings a new assignment. You are handed a small pile of clay tablets marked with an unfamiliar seal, a pair of crossed fish hooks. You flip the first one over and begin reading. It's a list of names. At first, you assume it's another attendance sheet or payment log. But as you trace the marks, you realize it's something else entirely. A complaint list. Your stomach sinks a little. You skim through the names. Beside each, a brief but pointed note. Absent on the 7th moon. Left the worksite before sundown. Arrived late 3 mornings in a row. Argued with overseer about fish rations. You glance up at the scribe who handed it to you. He gives you a dry smile. "Time to start the slacker records," he says with a raised brow. You glance back down at the tablet. There must be at least 50 names here, each paired with some tiny infraction. You shuffle through the rest of the stack, more of the same. You notice patterns. Some names repeat across several tablets. A few seem to have earned an entire tablet of their own. You hesitate. Do they know they're on these lists, you ask softly? The scribe leans back and clasps his hands behind his head. Sometimes he shrugs. Depends if someone wants them to know. And there it is, temple politics in clay form. Historians still argue about whether these kinds of records served as formal warnings blacklists or simply petty gossip preserved forever in mud. Some believe the workers had no idea they were being recorded like this. Others suggest these tablets were waved around publicly as tools of humiliation or bargaining chips to encourage better behavior. You can practically hear the whispered arguments echoing in the dim halls. You'll never work the Northern Canal again if your name's on that list. You pick up another tablet, this one different from the others. It's less a list and more of a letter. You tilt your head, reading slowly. It's a defense. A worker named Ahuili has written, probably dictated, since most laborers aren't literate, a formal protest against the claims on the earlier tablets. He insists he wasn't late. He claims the overseer miscounted. He says the missing fish rations were already spoiled when they arrived. You can almost hear his voice in the marks, frustrated, tired, maybe a little desperate. The scribe beside you leans over your shoulder and whispers, "He's not wrong, you know." You glance up, startled. The scribe leans back, folding his arms. That overseer's been cutting rations for months. Everyone knows it. You stare down at the tiny marks, suddenly aware of how one-sided these clay complaints really are. How easy it is to accuse someone when they don't get to write back. You spend the rest of the afternoon carefully copying both the complaints and the defenses, adding a small note to each about the dates and seals. You don't know who will read them or if anyone will care, but you do it anyway. By the time the sun dips low, you've copied nearly a dozen of these little battles onto fresh tablets. You stack them neatly on the shelf marked Disputes Pending Review. As you stand to leave, you glance back at the pile. You wonder how many workers' fates hang on those tiny marks. You wonder if anyone ever wins. You step out into the cooling evening air, promising yourself that tomorrow when you write another complaint or defense, you'll remember the voice behind it. After all, you wouldn't want to end up on one of those lists yourself. By the following week, you've earned something of a reputation among the scribes. Not for your speed, you're still painfully slow compared to the veterans. Not for your flawless cuneiform, you still confuse the sign for bundle of reeds with piglet, more often than you'd like to admit. No, your reputation is for asking questions. Too many, according to some. Not enough, according to you. And today, you have another one brewing. You're asked to assist a supervisor, yes, a real supervisor with a materials audit. This is different from the usual copy work. You'll actually visit the storerooms, compare lists to the physical supplies, and confirm whether the numbers match. Spoiler alert, they almost never do. You follow the supervisor through the temple's back corridors, feeling strangely official. He doesn't speak much, just mutters about the heat and scratches his beard like the barley's already given him indigestion. The storerooms are cool and dim, lined with towering shelves of clay jars, baskets of wool, and sacks of dried legumes. You've never actually seen this much food and fabric in one place before. It smells like dust oil and something sour. You try not to think about it too hard. The supervisor hands you a tablet and points toward a row of sealed jars. Start counting, he grunts. You do, slowly, carefully. Sesame oil jars, linen bundles, barley sacks. You compare the marks on the tablet to the physical items, and of course they don't match. 16 jars, you whisper, tapping the list. But there are only 13. The supervisor leans in, squinting at the jars. He doesn't look surprised, not even a little. Check the next one, he mutters. You do. More discrepancies. 3 baskets of wool short. 2 sacks of barley mysteriously missing. You glance up, expecting some kind of reaction. What you get is a long, weary sigh. This is normal. You can feel it in the air. You press a little careful, not to sound accusatory. Should we mark them as missing? And the supervisor scratches his beard again, avoiding your gaze. Not yet, he mumbles. Let me check with the quartermaster. You watch him disappear down the hall, leaving you alone with the uneven shelves and the quiet buzz of flies circling a cracked jar in the corner. Historians still argue over how much corruption seeped into temple management. Some believe temple stores were tightly controlled, every jar accounted for. Others argue that supervisors regularly skimmed supplies, fudged numbers, and covered their tracks with creative record-keeping. You suspect you've just witnessed the latter in action. The supervisor returns a few minutes later holding a different tablet. He glances between the 2 records, then back at you. Use this list, he says flatly, handing you the replacement. You take it, heart sinking slightly as you scan the new marks. This list conveniently matches the supplies on the shelves, missing jars and all. You swallow hard, unsure if you should push further. But something in the supervisor's tight jaw tells you the answer is no. You spend the rest of the afternoon transcribing the corrected numbers onto fresh tablets, knowing full well they're not accurate. You wonder how many times this little charade has played out before. You wonder how many scribes have nodded, silently pressing styluses into clay with the same uneasy feeling in their stomachs. As you finish the last tablet, you glance toward the door, half expecting the head scribe to burst in and declare the audit invalid. But no one comes. The supervisor gathers the finished tablets, thanks you with a nod, and exits without another word. You stand there for a moment longer, staring at the empty shelf where 3 jars should have been. You pick up your stylus, press it into your personal practice tablet. and write a single word. Gone. You smooth it over before anyone sees. After all, no one asked for that record. If you thought yesterday's audit was stressful, you're about to find out it was just the warm-up act. Today, word spreads quickly through the temple halls a royal inspector is on the way. You're not sure what you expected when you first heard the term. Maybe some regal figure in gold-trimmed robes, flanked by guards with polished spears. What arrives instead is a man who looks exactly like every other scribe, only with sharper eyes and the permanent squint of someone who trusts no one. He carries a stylus that looks suspiciously newer than everyone else's, and he taps it against his palm as he surveys the record hall like he's already found something wrong, just by breathing the same air as the rest of you. The head scribe meets him at the doorway with a nervous laugh that does little to hide the tension in his jaw. Inspector Aradnana, he says, with the stiff enthusiasm of a man who would rather be anywhere else. The inspector doesn't respond. He simply gestures toward the tablets stacked along the back wall, the ones you helped prepare for the recent audits. You feel every scribe in the room tense at once like a string pulled too tight. The inspector starts his review without ceremony. He pulls down tablets at random, scanning them with the bored efficiency of someone who's done this far too many times. He squints. He sniffs, oddly enough. He even taps a few tablets lightly, as if listening for secret codes. You keep your head down, pretending to be deeply interested in smoothing the edge of your practice tablet. But you can't help sneaking glances. He pauses over one of the barley payout records, the very list you helped adjust just days ago. You swallow hard? The inspector runs his finger along the marks, then pulls a second tablet from his satchel. You can't see the details, but you notice the way the head scribe's face drains of color. Aradnana raises one eyebrow without speaking. The head scribe clears his throat. There may have been a last-minute adjustment due to... The inspector holds up one hand, cutting him off. He sets the tablet aside, marking it with a small clay seal. You don't need anyone to explain what that means. This list is under review. The room feels suddenly heavier, like the very walls are holding their breath. The inspector moves on, selecting tablets from different shelves. Job descriptions, labor complaints, shipment tallies. He flips through them all with unnerving speed, occasionally pausing to mark another with his seal. 3 tablets, 4, 5. You glance around the room, catching the wide-eyed looks being exchanged between scribes. This is not normal. Historians still debate how much power royal inspectors actually held. Some argue they were little more than messengers reporting inconsistencies back to the palace. Others suggest they had the authority to strip overseers of their posts on the spot. Given the way your head scribe's hands are trembling, you suspect the latter is closer to the truth. The inspector finally stops in front of the shelf labeled Disputes Pending Review. He picks up the tablets you worked on just days ago, the ones listing the canal workers' protests, the absentee records, the quiet defenses etched with tired defiance. You hold your breath as he flips through them. To your surprise, he sets them down without marking them. Instead, he turns to the head scribe and asks, "Have these been resolved?" The head scribe shifts uncomfortably. Not yet, he admits. The inspector taps one tablet, the defense written in behalf of Ahu Ilay, the laborer who claimed he was wrongly accused of slacking off. "Follow up," Aradnana says simply before turning back toward the doorway. And just like that, the inspection ends. No dramatic punishment, no shouting. Just a small pile of sealed tablets left behind like tiny clay time bombs. As the inspector disappears down the hallway, the scribes let out a collective exhale. The head scribe slumps onto the nearest bench, rubbing his face with both hands. "Back to work," he mutters, waving you all toward the shelves. But you're already glancing toward that untouched dispute tablet, your mind racing. Looks like someone might finally get their chance to be heard. The next few days are surprisingly quiet. The usual scribal squabbles die down to cautious whispers. You notice fewer eye rolls, fewer smirks. It's as if Aradnana's visit has cast a long invisible shadow over the entire temple. Even the most veteran scribes seem to double-check their tablets twice before shelving them. But the real surprise comes when the head scribe calls you over. He's holding the same defense tablet, the one written for Ahuili, the canal worker, accused of skipping shifts and stealing fish. I need you, the head scribe says in a low voice, to follow up on this. You blink certain you've misheard, an apprentice following up on an official complaint. But the head scribe looks dead serious and frankly more exhausted than you've ever seen him. You nod before your brain can catch up with your mouth. Start at the canal camp, he adds, sliding the tablet toward you. Ask for the overseer Irabani. And just like that, you've been promoted temporarily, unofficially, and absolutely unpaid to field investigator. You make your way out of the temple, clutching the tablet like it's the king's personal decree. The city feels different when you're carrying something that actually matters. The streets seem louder, the crowds denser, every face more curious than the last. You resist the urge to hide the tablet under your robe. The canal camp lies on the edge of the city where the river bends and the land flattens into muddy banks. You spot the workers before you see the overseer, dozens of them covered in dust and sweat, hauling baskets of wet clay and piling reeds for reinforcement. Among them, standing with arms crossed and scowl firmly in place, is Irabani. The overseer. You take a breath and approach. I'm here about Ahuili, you say, trying to keep your voice steady. Irabani's face hardens instantly. Again he mutters. That man never stops complaining. You hold up the tablet. There's a record of his defense. The inspector wants this resolved. Irabani snatches the tablet from your hand, scanning the marks with an exaggerated groan. He's lazy. Irabani snaps. Always late. Always asking for more rations. I've got 3 other men who'll tell you the same. You glance past him toward the workers. Ahuili isn't hard to spot. He's the one standing apart. Arms resting on a shovel, watching you with a mix of curiosity and something else. You take another breath. Then let me ask him. Irabani laughs bitterly, but waves you off with a sarcastic little bow. You walk toward Ahuili, heart thumping harder than it should. He stands taller as you approach, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. You're the one writing all this down, aren't you? He says before you can speak. You nod. I'm here to settle this. He crosses his arms, looking past you toward the overseer. I wasn't late, Ahuili says quietly. The rations were short. Everyone knew it. Irabani's nephew runs the storeroom. You think we don't notice when the baskets get smaller every week? You glance back at Irabani, who is now very pointedly looking anywhere but in your direction. Historians still argue about the real dynamics between laborers and overseers in ancient Babylon. Some believe workers had no voice at all, trapped in cycles of debt and punishment. Others suggest there were quiet, often unrecorded ways workers resisted by forming alliances, voicing complaints, or leveraging temple politics when they could. You realize now that Ahuili's tablet, the one you helped copy, is part of that resistance. You turn back to him. Will the others speak for you? He nods, if you ask them. And so you do. One by one you gather quiet confirmations. Not loud enough to spark open rebellion, but firm enough to cast doubt on the overseer's spotless record. By the time you return to the temple that evening, your hands ache from holding all the freshly pressed witness tablets. The head scribe looks up as you enter, eyes widening slightly when he sees the stack you carry. You set them down, gently looking him in the eye for the first time without flinching. Consider it followed up, you whisper. And for the first time since you arrived, the head scribe almost smiles. By the end of the week, your feet seem to move through the temple halls on their own. You know the curves of these walls now. The scent of damp clay, the scratchy echo of styluses at work, the weight of the air when someone's made a mistake, and everyone knows it, but no one dares say a word. The head scribe waves you over again, not to scold you this time, not to hand you another pile of fish records or barley complaints. No, today feels different. He holds a single, freshly dried tablet in both hands. Take this to the temple archive, he says softly. You step closer, reading the marks. It's the final ruling on Ahuili's case. After days of interviews, double-checking tablets, and quiet whispers between priests, the decision has been made. The worker's record has been cleared, his rations restored. His name for now removed from the ever-growing list of temple slackers. It's victory in a way. A small crumb-sized victory, but a victory nonetheless. You take the tablet with the kind of care usually reserved for cradling newborn kittens or holding a sleeping baby bird. It's heavier than you expect, even though you've carried dozens just like it before. The temple archive lies at the very back of the complex, behind thick wooden doors, sealed with clay stamps that crack softly as you press them open. The air is dry cooler here. Rows upon rows of tablets sit on stone shelves, each carefully tagged with tiny clay labels. You walk past lists of grain shipments older than your grandfather's grandfather, past complaints written by scribes long forgotten, past royal decrees from kings whose names no one dares mispronounce. And then you find the spot a shelf marked Resolved Labor Disputes. You place Ahuili's tablet on the shelf, pressing it gently into place between two others. You step back, staring at it for a long moment. It feels like closure, or at least the closest thing you've seen to it in Babylon. You turn to leave, but something catches your eye. Near the bottom shelf sits a collection of broken tablets, their edges chipped, their inscriptions smeared or unfinished. Forgotten drafts, maybe. Records no one cared to finish. You kneel down, tracing one of them with your finger. It's barely legible, but you recognize the marks. Someone long ago started recording a similar dispute, a workers' protest about missing rations, but the tablet was never finished. You wonder if that person ever got their barley back, or if their story ended in silence. You stand slowly, dusting your hands on your robe. As you exit the archive, the head scribe meets your gaze again. No words, just a slight nod. A tiny, flickering approval. The sun is already sinking when you step outside. The city hums as usual, traders shouting, oxen groaning somewhere, a flute playing off-key. You take the long way home, walking past the edge of the canal, where Ahuili and the others are already back to work. He spots you, lifts a hand in acknowledgement. Not a grand gesture, just a quiet thanks you feel more than here. You smile, turning your face toward the darkening sky. Another day done. Another name for now cleared. And somewhere out there, tomorrow's list is already being written, and now you let yourself slow down. The streets of Babylon begin to quiet as the sun finally dips beyond the horizon, painting the clouds a deep violet. You walk a little slower now, your steps softer, your breath, evening out with the rhythm of the city settling into night. The scent of baked bread drifts from a nearby home. Someone hums a gentle tune in the distance, low, almost like a lullaby. The flicker of oil lamps lights your path as you make your way back through the winding alleys. You pass the familiar clay walls, the same crooked rooftops, the same sleepy dogs curling up near doorways. Even the goats seem to have called it a night. Above you, stars begin to appear one by one, tiny pinpricks of light on a velvet sky. The great ziggurat stands tall in the distance, its terraces glowing softly under the moonlight. You pause for a moment, just to take it all in the hush. The stillness, the peace that somehow finds its way into even the busiest corners of this ancient city. And as you step inside your tiny room curling up on your woven mat, you can almost hear the soft scratching of styluses somewhere far away, still pressing tiny marks into clay, still recording stories, some forgotten, some remembered, and some just beginning. Let your eyes grow heavier now. Let your breath fall into a slow, steady rhythm. There's nothing more you need to do tonight. You've walked the halls of Babylon. You've carried its stories, and for now that's more than enough. Sleep well, my friend.